This Thunderbird was here in the beginning of the summer last year, or actually not last year, beginning of this summer. And for whatever reason, it has no brakes at all right now. So it's actually, they didn't really even drive it that much. The car is just sat. So don't know what the problem is, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. I guess it was dead when they put it on the truck, so it's been running since it came from Caprara's Auto Body, which is some friends of ours in Troy. So anyways, Vaughn's is dropping it off, and we're gonna figure it out. All right, so in the last video, I showed Oliver making a little pan-hard bar bracket that he took a picture of the rear end with his phone, with like the phone, that iPhone LiDAR, and then, you know, not that it's anything super crazy, but this bracket here is the bracket that he basically took a picture of the rear and then made this bracket on the plasma table with really not having to do anything other than pushing buttons, which is crazy to me. But anyways, I'm just putting the brakes together on this Ford 8-inch, and then this thing is basically ready to go on the ground and be a roller. Jack is doing some body work here on Max's wagon, and I don't know why, but there's a earplug in the quarter panel.
All right, so I have the holes taped off, either back taped where I can get to, or if I can't get to it, I just shoved an earplug in here just to plug the hole, so when I spread filler over top of it, it doesn't run down the inside of the panel and give you a nasty mud one that you gotta dig out later. That being said, I have this kind of roughed out where halfway sort of needs to be with filler beforehand, and what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna mix up some filler, and I'm gonna skim coat this quarter panel. I have the body lines taped off twice in some areas. Like there's this layer of tape, and then there's one layer of tape underneath it. And what that allows me to do is I can peel this tape off while the filler is still wet, and it will leave the layer of tape underneath it there. So it'll give me a nice crisp line when I pull the tape off, and then when I go to block it, I'll have a fence to where I will block to make the line nice and crisp.
So this is the same thing you kind of did on the door panel body line?
Sort of.
Okay.
It's basically the same thing. This is just some masking paper just to keep me from making a mess on the inside. This was just some tape. I did it the same way just so I can peel this off and I won't get filler on this. There's this garnish trim that's actually spot welded to the quarter panel. It's not removable. So I gotta be careful not to fill it with plastic filler when I do this.
Right.
The idea with, if we come over to the filler over here, I got a big mixing board and I got quite a bit of filler. This is a lot of filler, but it's not a lot of filler once you spread it on the car and you sand it off. Most of it ends up as dust on the floor that you throw in the trash can. What gets left on the car is a lot thinner than what you would expect with using this much filler.
It's like you're making a pizza.
So I'm going to use hardener. This is mixed up. How much hardener you use is proportional on how much filler you're using. So typically, if you look at this little diagram on the side of this can,
There's a diagram?
Yeah, usually they'll come with diagrams on them to give you a kind of idea. I kind of feel it out. Too much hardener, it'll go off way too quick. It'll harden before you can spread it. Not enough, and it won't harden. So you got to make sure your ratios are right.
This is what I'm terrible at. Every time I mix filler, I put way too much hardener in it, and it literally is like, I have like 30 seconds to work with it, which is why I'm like, every time I watch Jack spread filler, it like looks awesome. Like he can do it so nice and it comes out great. And I'm like, every time I try to do that, like by the second or third time I spread filler, it's like hard and shot. So I'm like jealous of how good Jack is of doing this.
So I'm gonna add some hardener to this. It's a little bit heavy on the hardener, but that's okay. Because we don't want this not to harden. So I might actually put a little bit more just to be on the safe side. But
I also make a giant mess of trying to mix this.
This is why you use a giant mixing board when you're using this much filler.
Yeah.
You'll take some of this, it's just Fiberglass polyester resin.
So this is something not everybody does, but you always do this when you're mixing filler.
I don't always do it. It depends on the area and what I'm trying to do with the filler.
Okay.
What this will do is this will thin the filler out and make it runnier.
Oh, another reason why probably when I do it, it doesn't look as good as when you do it.
It'll make it runnier, and the reason I'm using it, besides having it lay out nicer, is this will also give you more time when you spread the filler. It will delay the chemical reaction that's going on between the hardener and the filler.
Oh.
The drawback between using this stuff is that if you use too much of it, the plastic won't harden and it'll stay gummy and it'll be a big mess. The other problem is that the more of this stuff you use, the less strength you're going to have with this filler, the more brittle it will get. So you kind of have to know when to use it in certain circumstances.
Okay. It's like we're on a morning, the morning show, and you're baking something.
A very smelly, burny, chemical.
You're gonna be like, this is how I do it, and then all of a sudden, here's the finished salad.
This is where it gets tricky, because I gotta mix this and then spread it on.
Do your thing. I'm going this way.
I like to stir it up first, kind of get them to generally mix together with the edge of my spreader. Some people use a putty knife. I don't really like that because it'll aerate the filler. This will too, but I'm only kind of roughing it in mixture-wise. Wipe the edges off and go around in a circle and start kneading it. Make sure I'm squishing underneath it to lift up what's underneath to make sure it's all mixed together.
Man, if I tried to do that with like a quarter of that amount, it would be all over my hands. You don't have it anywhere.
Well, I'm wearing gloves and I do have a lot on my hands, but it's part of, you gotta work quick. I tried to do as much explanation beforehand because now I have to focus.
Right.
But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to knead this all into one color. You don't want any spots that have, see how there's still some yellow on the outside. You want to make sure you mix that in. Any kind of hardener, that's why I'm wiping the edges of my spreader off. Make sure that it's nice and mixed in. You're mixing it as well as you see all these air bubbles forming. That's air is being trapped in the filler as you're kneading it, as well as the chemical reaction is starting. So the process of mixing and kneading it will hopefully work a lot of those trapped gases out of the filler. But now that I have this pretty well mixed, gotta work fast. Try to make sure this is all one. And what I'll do first is I'll put it on the car before I start trying to spread it. You're gonna make a mess, so. You're not trying to make it nice right now, you're just trying to get it on there.
You notice it's getting any harder at all?
Not yet.
No?
It's just, I'm being very messy with it right now because I just want it on. I don't care what it looks like at this point, I'm just trying to get it kind of evened out on the car. Proportion-wise. Actually could have used a little bit more filler. But I'm making a mess.
You just stepped in it.
It's okay. Now's the part where I'm going to start spreading it out. Watch you don't get hit with some flying debris. You want to get this stuff spread out as fast as you can and give yourself as much time, because you can play with it a little bit. You can only play with it so long, but you want it, any kind of fine tuning you'll do at the end. First, you just want to get it on and spread out. The sharper you hold your pad, your spreader, the more it will remove. The shallower you hold the spreader, the more it'll lay it down. So if I lay it down like this, it'll lay it down. If I go like this sharp, it'll pull it off. So if I want to take some from a different area, I can move it to other places. Now this won't be the final coat, so it's okay if you don't get it perfect the first time. Nobody does. I try to make it as even and coat the entire panel if possible.
Why is that? I mean,
it's like paving a road.
Yeah.
You do a bunch of potholes, it's gonna fall apart, the snowplow is gonna rip it up. Same thing with when you're trying to make something that was never straight. This is the part where you can't afford to be messy. Don't wear nice clothes. You can lift it off and clean it up if you have to. And I'll tend to work this as long as I can. Once it starts to harden up, you'll tell the difference. And you can actually see it's starting to a little bit right now. You see the reflection as I'm spreading it, it's starting to get kind of grainy. That means it's starting to harden up. That means you gotta plan your next move if you're gonna keep playing with it or not, because if you play with it too long, you'll ruin what you did.
I mean, no matter, even if the metal work is perfect, you still end up doing this just
It depends on how you're trying to restore the car.
Okay.
If you're trying to restore the car as it came from the factory, they weren't as nice as they are nowadays. It is possible to do restorations with little or no filler that way, but if you're trying to bring them up to modern standards, where the panels have no dives on the edges where they meet another panel, or if you look down the side and the panel's not all wavy, that is impossible to do without some sort of filler. Some people will try to say that you can do it with polyester primer, but that is abusing the polyester primer. You want to use the materials the way that they are designed. Polyester primer is not supposed to be used as thick as filler can be used. Not to say that you want to abuse the filler, but every product has its place. And if you use one in the wrong place and use it past its designed operating thickness, is when you're going to have problems.
And then, so poly primer can go about how thick before you're abusing it?
I only like to put 3 or 4 coats on, and some people will say, oh, you can use this to block out bad body work. I don't use it like that. I will make my filler work as nice as I would doing it if I was using a urethane primer. I just prefer to use a polyester primer because it helps to hold, it's a lot thicker mill build. It helps to hold down the repair, and it just comes out better because you have a lot more to block on. And then you can sand that out. It's starting to get a little hard right now, so now is the time when I'm going to peel the tape line off like I had explained before. Nice clean line. Up here, same thing. Just a little bit right here. Then you square it off, and that's your first coat.
And that's how that's done. Next is some sanding. So Jack and I were just talking about how this part of the job is usually the part that everybody says or hides, tries to hide or says it doesn't happen. And as you guys probably already know, Jack is fanatical about metalwork and making the metalwork as perfect as possible. I mean, if you know what's underneath this cover here, you know, and what I've put in previous videos, just the metalwork on the Karmann Ghia, you know, it's perfect. When you look at it, it's perfect. It literally is, you know, metal finish to a polish, and it's like there's no waves in it. When Jack does metalwork, he does his best to make it as perfect as possible. However, it's still going to get a skim coat of filler on it to be blocked, so it's perfect.
As close as you can get.
Right.
Nothing's perfect.
But you know, when it comes down to it, there's so many people that say, oh, there's no filler in that car. Like, I hear it, especially from old guys. They'll talk about how, you know, there's no filler at all in that car, and it's leaded, and there's no body filler, just lead, and that's the way to do it. But when it comes down to it, it's, in many cases, those cars aren't really flat or that smooth.
If you go to a car show and you talk to people, and just like what he's saying, car's got no Bondo in it. It's all metal. This is a brand called All Metal. This is body filler that's got aluminum shaved into it. It's terrible. I hate this. Never use this.
I have it though. That's something I bought probably, I don't even know, years ago. I used it to, there were some pinholes in a 32 Ford grill shell that were like, it was rusted through. It was just, there was a couple tiny little pinholes, and that's what I used. And whether that's the right way or the wrong way, that's what I did. I don't know. Judge me for it. Jack, I'm sure, is judging me in his head because I did it that way. But you know, doing it this way, and once this is all blocked out, this is probably gonna get skimmed again, right?
It might be skimmed two or three more times, depending on the shape of the panel. That's why I'm very, very picky when it comes to doing metalwork, because I started out as doing what you see right here as a filler tech, doing high-end concours restorations. And the thing is that coming from a body filler, body tech point of view, I understand how much work it takes to make something that's not right in metal and to take it from that and to finish it in filler. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It's really messy. It's you know, it's dusty. It's not good for your health. You know, doing this, I probably lost a year or so of my life. That being said, the nicer you can get the metal work, the less of this work you got to do.
Right. But this is still something that has to be done if you want it to be nice.
Yeah, people will argue with that with that point of view. And okay, this car it's metal finished. It doesn't need any plastic on it. You can get away with using urethane primer or polyester primer. And while that is kind of true, you can do a stock-ish looking restoration. Like if you're doing like a restoration where you want it to look like it came from the factory. And what I mean by that is these weren't that good from the factory to begin with. And you can get them to that point, but you're gonna have different areas where it's something called panel dive, where the edges of the panels will have a little bit of roundness to them, and there'll be a low spot in where the jam is.
Yeah.
That's how they work. New cars don't have panel dive as significantly as these old cars do. So to take an old car and to bring it up to modern standards, even if the metalwork is perfect, as if the car rolled off the assembly line, you still need filler to get it to the taillight to headlight finished jobs where you can look at, you can crouch down a quarter panel, look to the front fender, and the car is perfectly flat, no transitions between panels.
Right.
You need filler to do that. It's impossible without it unless you made that car from scratch. And even the cars that you built from scratch, it's very hard to get into that point. And you might have areas where you could, you know, you could say you could use polyester to fill these certain areas, but every product that is used in bodywork has its place. This plastic filler can only be so thick before you're going to start to have problems. If you're using fiberglass reinforced filler, it can only be so thick and it might not adhere so well used in certain circumstances. So you got to know when and where to use each product. If you use them beyond their means, like if this core was, you know, metal finished, as good as you could get it, and it still had a couple ripples and waves in it, and you were just to put, you know, put 3 or 4 coats of polyester on it, block it, and you burn through in a bunch of spots because it's still wavy underneath it, and you prime it again, you block it, and it burns through, and you prime it again. Do that 3 or 4 times. How thick is that polyester primer by the time you get done with it? When you could just do it in filler, and you're not going to be using the product more than it's designed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if you abuse the product in any way, if you abuse filler, you're going to have a problem. If you abuse primer, you're going to have a problem.
Right.
So it's use the products to where they're designed. It's better to have a skim coat that you block out to get it as nice as you can get it, and then do your polyester work on top of the filler than it is to try to abuse one or the other.
Yep. All right, well, that's Jack's,
the way I like to do,
go ahead.
The way I like to do my bodywork is I will block this out to the point where I don't even think you would need, like, because some people will say, oh, you know, they'll feel a panel and they'll say, that's good enough for polyester. Polyester will take care of that. I don't like that at all. And what I mean by that is, I like it so if you run your hand across this and you feel it, I have a very experienced, you know, hand doing bodywork.
Jack has experienced hands.
It's, you know, you can feel if it's going to be ready for filler or not. And if I feel anything, I'll keep working at it. Make every step as good as you can get it. Don't cut corners.
Well, that's that, Jack. It's looking great.
Now it's nice and hard and it's going to be a bitch to block.
All right, sorry. Get back to blocking. What do you think, Matt?
It's a nice talk. You explain things very well. Jack does.
What about you? You don't explain things well?
No.
What are you making?
What a panel.
How's that go?
It's metal. It goes, bam. It goes like that. Still need to work at it because I tipped the edge a little bit too much, so that's too fat. Yeah. Now it needs to be like half that size, but that's okay because I can still fix that. And then that goes somewhere like that. Bing, bang, boom. You know, this is just kind of rough fitting right now because I just put that in there, so it changes everything. But yeah.
Cool. So they make patch panels for the cab corners here, and we got one, and it was about 2 inches too short.
Awful.
So
Awful.
What Matt's doing is making the edges. He's made this flange here. I'm not going to bother opening the door, but he made this flange so the body line's nice, which is kind of a tricky piece because it kind of comes down and then curves in to
I'm still gonna
match
mess with the door a little bit too.
Yep. And then you know, so the piece that we got, literally, if you were to try to line it up here, first off, the flange didn't really match that well.
Yeah, I can show.
And then it ended about here. So there was literally a couple inches that it still needed. So what Matt's doing is making the flanges, and then he's going to probably use a piece of that.
Yeah, I use most of it. So this is the old panel that I cut off of it. If you place this right on top of the new panel, the curvature and everything in the new panel is actually fine. It's just, I don't know.
The length is different.
This whole middle section is pretty good. The rest of it, absolute garbage.
Well, I'll let you get back to it. The motor is painted and looks really great. Right now it's just a matter of aligning all the pulleys. So this alternator bracket kind of goes where it has to go, and then the crank pulley is kind of weird because we got the crank pulley we got the harmonic balancer, then a crank pulley that goes on here, and we put that on. It doesn't line up with the water pump pulley, and although all of this stuff came as a kit, none of it really works. So what Timmy's doing now is making spacers for the alternator bracket. So this is going to be at the the depth that it needs to be. The water pump pulley kind of has to go where it goes. The crank, the harmonic balancer kind of has to go where it goes. The water pump pulley can't go in far enough to put the crank pulley where it needs to be. So pretty much what we're doing is making a new spacer for the crank pulley to get mounted at the correct depth so it'll line up with the water pump pulley. Oliver drew this up in whatever he drew it up in, and then that is going to be a spacer. What we need is a 1/4 inch spacer. The pulley came with like a 5/16 thick like washer on it, and the 5/16 is just a little bit too much. Sorry.
Straight line. It's just a spacer.
Oh. So this, what Oliver drew, is essentially this, but also has the correct bolt hole. All this stuff is just media blasted because it's gonna get painted tomorrow. All this stuff has to get painted. This motor looks beautiful. I Cerakoted these ram horn manifolds and pretty much all good. This is now polished. We kind of just did the fins, Jack polished those out. I just got finished putting the rear drums together on this rear, so this is all new stuff. The rear is together and in. It's looking good. So the motor then can go in the chassis, the transmission can go in, and we'll have basically a done chassis. At that point, we're gonna get the body. So this car is a 34 Ford. It's a 2-door sedan. It's a running car now. It's on another chassis, and it drives around. It was built like in the 80s at some point, and it has like a Ford Pinto motor in it. So the body is painted red. It's pretty nice. It's not perfect, but it's pretty nice. So the idea is we put together this beautiful new clean chassis with all new components, new engine, new transmission, whole new brake system. You know, this chassis originally had that independent rear suspension Jaguar rear. This is like a 30-year-old chassis. So we basically like kind of backdated it. But long story short, this is going to be a nice traditional style car or traditional style chassis that's going to work beautiful for this car. So we'll be able to put the motor trans in and then put the body on. We will have to notch the firewall a little bit for the small block Chevy. So there'll be a bit of work into that, but other than that, we're not painting the car. We're not really getting into the car. We're just mounting the body on this chassis, and then he will be good to go. So I'm excited for Ralph because this will be a nice driving hot rod, and it's gonna have plenty of power with this motor in it. You know, it's way more power than you need for an old 30s car, but he'll have a lot of fun with it. So anyways, I hope you liked the video. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Later, guys. See you tomorrow.